You're sitting in a tavern, you've just had your fill of ale and are ready to move on with your night, but there's a problem. On your way out, you see a man lying dead at the entrance with a dagger protruding from his chest. The last thing he was drinking now sits abandoned on the table next to him, an empty tankard with a strange symbol emblazoned on the front. This is the story of ale and ashes, the deadly drink that haunted the medieval taverns. I run a popular history channel where we bring you new videos every week about all aspects of the past. In this series, we look specifically at the strange and unusual stories from history that don't really fit anywhere else. If you like what we do here, please do consider supporting us. Alehouses were a fact of life in medieval Europe, providing not only a place to grab a quick drink, but somewhere for people to meet and talk. They were places for local farmers to discuss politics or tradesmen to haggle over prices. It was also a place for lovers to meet up or for families to eat dinner. As a result, they were some of the busiest buildings in any town or city, filled with men, women, and children from all walks of life. It was also the perfect place for criminals to operate. Because of how crowded these establishments often were, it wasn't hard for thieves to slip into a group of patrons and pick their pockets. This wasn't necessarily easy, though. Thieves would have been well aware of other thieves looking to do the same thing, and would need to be constantly on guard themselves. But a good thief always had his eye out for the fattest merchant or the prettiest girl with the flashiest jewelry. However, there were other dangers in these crowded rooms. Drunken brawls were common, as were fights between men who thought they were better than others because they had more money. Many taverns were divided into separate rooms to try and limit how much trouble could be caused. But even so, sometimes it would get so bad that landlords would call upon the local constables to come and restore order. And if the fight was particularly nasty, maybe even hang one of the ringleaders as an example to the rest of them. And then there was the ale itself. Taverns were busy, which meant that serving customers quickly was more important than checking the quality of the ale. Most of the time, there weren't too many problems with this, but occasionally a customer might be served a tankard of stale or contaminated beer. Drinking old ale could make you very sick and even go blind, while bad batches could kill you outright. To combat this, brewers began adding a small amount of something called arsenic into their brews. Arsenic isn't poisonous in small amounts, but it does cause stomach cramping and vomiting, which can be very uncomfortable. By adding it to their drinks, brewers could quickly tell if their ale was off by seeing if their customers got violently ill after drinking it. But there were worse things than bad beer, things that could kill you without you even knowing it. Nothing quite compares, however, to the potent mix of tremolite and quartz found in the stone chambers, a deadly form of the mineral asbestos. When inhaled, the fibers can lodge themselves in someone's lungs and cause cancer. Exposure to large amounts will kill you within 10 years, while smaller doses may not kill you, but will leave you breathless and coughing up blood. Fun times. How did these deadly substances end up in the ale? Well, let me introduce you to sacristans. Now, you may think that this is a particularly edgy type of Sith Lord, but it actually comes from the Latin word sacerdos, meaning priest. Sacristans were often employed by churches to take care of their day-to-day operations. They would clean the building, ring the bell, and look after the sacred vessels used during Mass. Some sacristans were monks, while others were laypeople. But no matter their background, they shared one thing in common. They were generally poor. Medieval church leaders believed that those who dedicated their lives to God should do so without any material possessions. So most sacristans didn't earn much money and relied on donations from parishioners. However, this wasn't always enough, and as a result, many turned to selling their labor as best they could, and where better to find work than in a tavern. Serving drinks wasn't exactly high-status work, but it paid the bills. This created a situation where priests and laypeople alike were serving drinks in taverns alongside its servants. This led to a system whereby some people specialized in making large quantities of cheap beer and would sell it to taverns and alehouses across the city, known as brewers. These men often hired other people to help them meet demand, which included sacristans looking for extra cash. In theory, this was a pretty simple job. All they had to do was carry the beer from one building to another. But there was a problem. Medieval towns were dirty, like really, really dirty. Waste was thrown into the streets. Animals roamed freely, and the water supply was often contaminated with sewage. Because these carriers were paid so little, they usually wore long, loose robes to cover up as much of their body as possible to avoid getting too dirty. They also wore special masks to prevent them from breathing in the foul air. As you can imagine, carrying beer through the streets of London or Paris was pretty unpleasant, and to make it slightly more bearable, the brewers came up with a game. Every carrier would have to enter every tavern they visited and announce, "Beware the stone chambers." before taking off their mask. Only then would the tavern owner pay them and let them deliver their beer. The game turned into a drinking song and then took on a life of its own. People began dressing up as hairy wild men and storming taverns while shouting, "Beware the stone chambers." The song eventually took on lyrics about death, hell, and damnation, and the whole affair became a bit like Halloween, except with more drinking. The men dressed as hairy beasts representing the devil himself, and their masks became more and more grotesque as time went on. The worst part was that most people didn't realize they were being poisoned as they drank. Those who did know preferred not to say anything in case the mysterious song scared away any customers. There's no telling how many people died from drinking chamber stones, but it likely ran to the hundreds, if not thousands. By the late Middle Ages, authorities began to crack down on the practice. Innkeepers were warned not to serve drinks from anyone who sang the song, and the public was told to ignore anyone who shouted it. But by that time, the damage was already done. The cult of the stone chambers had taken root and would continue to haunt taverns for centuries. Thankfully, modern science has advanced since the Middle Ages, and we now have a much better understanding of where our drinking water comes from and how to keep it clean. We also now have indoor plumbing, which means that you can enjoy a nice cold glass of water whenever you want without having to worry about whether or not it'll kill you. Maybe I should rephrase that. We also have a much better understanding of where our drinking water comes from and how to keep it clean. Sorry. If you enjoyed this episode, then check out my podcast where I tell historical tales of intrigue, horror, and everything in between. New episodes are released every Wednesday and you can listen to the podcast on various platforms. Thanks for watching.